It was the story of Will, an unattractive and impoverished child who had accidentally awakened legendary powers capable of erasing all human existence. He had continued to hide his abilities to appear ordinary. One evening, after returning to his apartment and preparing a meal, he had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Upon waking, he had found himself facing a lavish feast and, upon seeing his reflection, a face that was not his own. He had manifested as a small child in another world, surrounded by musicians and a cheerful crowd. Initially, he had thought he had traveled abroad, but he quickly noticed everyone spoke Japanese, leading him to assume he was dreaming. However, the dream felt too real, especially when he tasted the food. As he tried to wake himself, an elderly man had roused him and instructed him to introduce himself to the guests. The man, who led him toward a group, urged him to speak. Will, now known as Shingo, felt terrified as all the adults stared. At that moment, a slightly older boy named Eric intervened, introducing him as his younger brother and explaining that his full name was too long, so everyone called him Will. Eric then sat beside him and asked why he had been so distracted earlier. When Will failed to answer, Eric explained that since Will was only 5, he would clarify everything. Today was their older brother Kurt's wedding to Amelie, the second daughter of the nobleman Maine. Their father had been delighted a noble's daughter accepted. Will then realized his new family was also of the noble class. That evening, as people drank and applauded, Will struggled to adjust to his new body and situation but felt relieved he could understand the language. Judging by the celebration, he assumed the family was wealthy, and as the third son, he believed he wouldn't need to worry about work or food, so he continued eating. However, his joy was short-lived. The next morning, Will was shocked by the terrible breakfast of dry, stale bread and watery soup. His family ate it as if it were normal. He noticed peeling wallpaper and a worn table. When Eric returned from hunting, Will asked in confusion how they could be so poor after such a huge celebration. Eric explained they had concealed their poverty for the wedding with curtains and borrowed fine food. They were, in truth, extremely poor. Will, still overwhelmed, assumed being a noble's third son meant he would inherit at least a small plot of land. But then Eric greeted another brother named Helmut, followed by Paul and Herman. Eric added that 2 more brothers had not attended the wedding. Will then realized the truth, he was the 8th son of this destitute noble household. Despite their circumstances, his parents seemed content. Will tried to understand his new world. They lived in the kingdom of Helmut, whose capital held nearly 1 million people. Far to the south lay the Blear Duchy, and farther still was the rural Balmontes region where they lived, a countryside with only about 800 residents. Will was the 8th son of that impoverished family. Feeling suffocated, Will saw 3 of his brothers saying farewell to their mother. He hurried to ask what was happening. Eric explained they were leaving because the land would not be divided. Their elder brother Kurt would inherit everything, Herman would marry into a branch family, and the rest would have to start from nothing in the capital, losing their noble status. Eric advised Will to pursue education as his only hope before departing, leaving Will heartbroken. Will went to the family library to prepare for his future but found only poetry and novels. As he returned a book, he accidentally knocked down a box containing a sheet of paper and a crystal orb. The paper explained the orb was a magical test stone that measured one's ability to use magic. Will nearly dismissed it until he remembered he was in a different world. Reading further, he learned only 1 in 1,000 people possessed enough mana to cast spells. The paper stated magical talent wasn't hereditary and the orb could reveal it. Unconvinced of his luck, Will decided to try. He placed the orb on the desk and attempted to pour mana into it. At first, nothing happened, but then it shone with an intense white light. Simultaneously, a long-haired man deep in the forest sensed something unusual. Back in the manor, Will was stunned. He grabbed the paper, which stated that a bright glow meant exceptional magical ability, and such a person should study under specialized instructors. Will searched the library but found no magic books, only novels and poetry. His father then entered. Will asked if they had more books, but his father admitted he couldn't read and said these were all they owned. He then told Will to gather firewood in the forest. In the forest, Will attempted magic with a branch but failed. His frustration grew until he heard a voice. A long-haired man descended from the sky, seeming delighted, and asked for his name. Frightened, Will threatened him with the branch. The man apologized, calmly took the branch, and tossed it away, explaining he was a magician. The branch fell off a cliff, striking a rock that tumbled onto a massive wild boar. The enraged boar charged. Will tried to run, but the magician grabbed his arm and told him to imagine wind magic. He instructed Will to visualize mana flowing through his body. Both glowed green as mana gathered in Will's hand. As the boar charged, a powerful burst of wind exploded from Will's hand, pushing it back, which only angered it further. The magician then used his own magic to hurl the boar away. Afterward, he introduced himself as Alfred Rainford, a former magician of the Bleak Duchy. He told Will he was gifted and would one day surpass him. When Will returned home, he was frustrated by their meager dinner of flavorless tea, unlike the delicious tea he had shared with Alfred. After the boar encounter, Alfred had sat with Will, drunk tea, and offered to teach him magic. Will was surprised, explaining he couldn't pay, but Alfred assured him he only wanted a student. Before training began, Alfred warned Will to keep his magic a secret to avoid complications in the family succession, as his talent could make people want him to replace Kurt as heir. Will, not fully understanding, promised secrecy after Alfred explained magic's immense power. The next day, their first session focused on capacity matching. Will needed to match his mana with someone who had more. As they held hands and circulated mana, Will was amazed by Alfred's strength. Alfred congratulated him, having worried Will might not manage it, as mana capacity was determined at birth. Will not only matched but surpassed Alfred's mana without reaching his limit, revealing talent far exceeding Alfred's. Meanwhile, at home, Will's father saw the magic orb on the shelf, confused by its movement. Remembering Will had been there, he laughed, and Kurt joined him, convinced Will had been disappointed to find he had no talent. In reality, Will was training in fire magic. Alfred applauded him for learning an advanced spell so quickly. Alfred had also brought a basket of vegetables from the mountain so Will's family would think he had been gathering food. That evening, the family praised Will for the vegetables, but Kurt felt uneasy, asking where he found a specific type that grew across a river with no bridge. Their father laughed off the idea, but Kurt began to suspect Will possessed magic. Days later, Will and Alfred flew high above the ground as Will practiced tracking magic. He felt the terrain's vibrations, located a bird, and launched a wind-propelled stone to strike it. They cooked and ate it. Will offered hot sauce, but Alfred wasn't affected. As they ate, Alfred warned Will not to venture deeper into the forest, where monsters, treasures, and rare herbs existed, but from which no one returned. Will confessed he felt Kurt was watching him everywhere. Alfred realized Kurt had figured it out and feared for his position as next leader, but Will had no desire to lead, seeing it as trouble and wanting to avoid conflict with his brothers. He was unsure what to do with his life, so Alfred suggested becoming an adventurer, an idea that appealed to Will. Suddenly, a demonic aura appeared on Alfred's arm. He grabbed it, hid it from Will, and forced it back with difficulty, knowing the time had not yet come. At dinner, Will announced his intention to become an adventurer. His older brother was happy, but their father said they had no money for the Adventurer Academy. During the next training, Alfred showed Will the city where the academy was located, BR, a commercial city where many joined merchant guilds. Will realized he could earn money there, but first needed to learn to travel via teleportation, specifically flight magic. Alfred grabbed Will's arms and lifted him into the sky. Will screamed until Alfred slowed down. At the top, Will was amazed by the breathtaking view. That night, Alfred faced the curse attacking him again. The next day, Will trained in flight magic. Alfred said it would be their final session. Will begged him not to leave after only 2 weeks, but Alfred silenced him, saying the decision was final. At dinner, their father mentioned a whisperer of the dead had appeared in the forest, a walking corpse that resembled a human, could speak, but was dead and felt nothing, eventually turning into a mindless zombie. Will remembered Alfred's cold body and his lack of reaction to the spicy sauce. Struck by fear, he flew into the dark forest to find him, falling several times before reaching him. Will warned Alfred about the undead creature, but Alfred confessed he himself was the Whisperer. He explained that 5 years prior, he had accompanied the Duke to find medicine for his sick son. They were attacked by an army of monsters. Alfred fought to protect the Duke until his mana ran out. Deep regret and a strong final wish to pass on his magical knowledge transformed him into a walking corpse. Finding Will had brought him overwhelming relief, he could finally rest. Only one test remained for Will, to purify him with holy magic. Will refused, but Alfred showed him how death was spreading through his body. He would soon lose consciousness and become a mindless zombie. He began teaching Will light magic. As Will recited the incantation, the black aura around Alfred began to burn. Alfred screamed in pain but encouraged him to proceed. With tears on his cheeks, Will didn't want to say goodbye, but Alfred told him to remember everything he had taught him. Will recalled his lessons, bowed, thanked him, and released him from his suffering. Alfred laughed faintly as he faded into the light, advising Will to live his life. Will wiped his tears, overwhelmed with grief, and promised to honor his teacher's final words. Years later, Will bid farewell to his mother and left home for the Adventurer Academy, which was bustling with trainees. In a classroom, new students introduced themselves, a blue-haired girl named Louise, and another named Anna. After Will introduced himself, the instructor handed out forms requiring them to create teams, a nightmare for Will. At dinner, Will sat alone, while Louise and Anna sat together. They quickly realized Will was the only scholarship student. Another student, Erwin, said Will's magical power was so high even the instructor admitted he couldn't teach him, adding that anyone on Will's team would have an easy life, which was why everyone kept their distance. Erwin had a plan. He believed Will was alone because he was evaluating the students, so if they all challenged him, Erwin as the best swordsman, Louise as the strongest fighter, and Anna as the top lancer, they might convince him to join their team. Will, unaware, decided to befriend them and offered spices he had brought. Before he could continue, a group of students announced Will would join their Axe Trio team and no one else's. Will didn't understand. Feeling jealous of others' camaraderie, he quietly returned to his seat. In the next lesson, instructors assigned them to go hunting. Will was excited to form a team but found everyone already in groups. At another table, Louise asked if they should invite him, but Erwin refused, believing Will's solitude was a challenge, meaning they had to hunt more than he did to reach his level. Hours later, students presented their hunts. Erwin's team proudly delivered 3 boars. When Will entered, he opened the magic pouch from Alfred and pulled out animal after animal until the table was covered. After witnessing his strength, the Axe Trio gave up on recruiting him. Will, unintentionally overwhelming everyone, received money for his hunt. He wanted to invite everyone to dinner, but when he turned, no one was left. That night, Erwin told the girls his life resembled theirs. As non-eldest children, they were treated as unimportant, and when their talents awakened, they became stronger than their relatives, who then avoided them out of embarrassment. They felt their dreams slipping away due to birth order, so they swore not to give up and promised to make Will acknowledge them. The next day, Erwin, Louise, and Anna entered the deep forest and were ambushed by numerous wolves. Will, hunting nearby, sensed them through tracking magic and thought saving them might help him make friends. He rushed to the scene. The trio fought desperately, but the wolves were overwhelming. Erwin was injured, and more wolves appeared until Will arrived. With a single spell, rocks surged from the ground, forming a barrier. After the incident, they apologized to Will, explaining they only wanted his acknowledgement. They admitted the spell he used was S rank, far beyond them, so they decided to abandon forming a team with him. Will nearly stopped them, but the instructor entered cheerfully and announced the Duke had invited them all to a banquet. The class discussed the prestigious invitation, but someone commented they were only invited because the Duke wanted to meet Will. Hearing that, Will felt uncomfortable with how little they thought of themselves. Only Erwin, Louise, and Anna didn't react much, focused on what to wear. At the banquet, their classmate was right. The Duke entered, ignored everyone else, and walked straight to Will. He introduced himself as Amadeus, greeted Will, and invited him to a private meeting. But Will shocked everyone by inviting Louise, Anna, and Erwin to join him, declaring publicly they were his team members. At Duke Amadeus's palace, the Duke introduced Will to his royal magician, Bran, who had also been Alfred's teacher. Bran explained that 7 years ago, he had sensed Alfred's presence disappear. As Alfred was a walking corpse, Bran assumed he had fulfilled his final wish and found a student. Noticing Will came from the region where Alfred died and possessed Alfred's magic pouch, Bran asked if he was Alfred's student. Will admitted it. When Bran asked how Alfred died, Will said he had purified him with holy magic. Bran felt sorry a child had to release his teacher but thanked Will for granting Alfred peace. Afterwards, Will returned everything inside the pouch, which turned out to be the Duke's old military supplies Alfred had taken years ago. After the meeting, Aina and the others discussed what they had heard, feeling ashamed for misjudging Will. They realized he was just like them, an overlooked younger child of a noble family. When Will joined them, they apologized, admitting they had planned to use his power to improve their lives if he joined their team. Will laughed and admitted he had also been using them. He didn't want to sit alone with a scary Duke, so he dragged them along. Then he added he genuinely wanted to form a team with them. They all laughed and accepted him wholeheartedly. Suddenly, the Duke entered and told Will he would receive a reward for returning Alfred's belongings, 1,000 gold coins and all of Alfred's property. That night, Will ate in his new mansion, feeling lonely in its size, and wondered if his friends could live with him. Sometime later, Will and his friends traveled on a magical airship to the capital for Eric's wedding. Louise was overly excited in an extravagant outfit. The Brandt family, whom Eric was marrying into, included many influential figures. Erwin held tightly onto a pole, terrified of falling, but Bran, their guide, reassured him the airship could never fall. Suddenly, clouds darkened and a massive bone dragon appeared. Passengers nearly lost control from fear, screaming at the crew, who reminded them they had the great magician Bran on board. However, Bran, in the control room, refused to fight, as he couldn't use holy magic against an undead dragon, but he knew someone who could. He looked at Will. Will tried to decline, but Bran assured him he would succeed, just as Alfred had. Using flight magic, Will launched himself toward the dragon, which exhaled black mist. Will erected a barrier at the last moment, while the ship was protected by a larger barrier from Bran. Will began casting holy spells, catching the dragon's attention. It lunged, but Will dodged skillfully with flight magic. He completed the incantation and struck the dragon with holy light. The dragon retaliated, but Will's spell destroyed its breath attack and damaged its body. Nearing death, the dragon launched a final desperate attack. Will created a protective barrier, and moments later, the dragon collapsed, its bones scattering. Will gathered the bones into his pouch, finding a dragon gem among them. A grand celebration erupted among the passengers. Bran then introduced them to an old teammate, Orito, who had become a merchant. The next day, everyone was severely hungover from the celebration except Will and his friends, who stared ahead at the capital awaiting them. Upon arrival, Bran immediately abandoned them and fled, leaving them with the merchant Oreo. At that moment, the king's knights approached, thanked Will for slaying the dragon, and requested he come to the castle. His friends left him at the gate, saying they would head to Eric's home ahead of him. Will entered with Oreo to meet the king, who granted him the title of 6th-rank baron for his bravery. At Eric's house, Bran and the others discussed Will's sudden promotion. Eric couldn't believe his younger brother outranked their father. The title allowed Will to begin a new noble lineage. His friends feared he might stop adventuring, but Bran reassured them the title wouldn't restrict him. Meanwhile, at the castle, Will was overwhelmed as noblemen argued over the price of the dragon bones and gem. One wanted the price lowered, another insisted on raising it sky high. Then the priest, Hull, stepped in, rescuing Will and telling the nobles to buy the items at a fair price. Oreo explained to Will that everyone was trying to pull him to their side, from the merchant wanting the items for a high price to Hull hoping to recruit him into the church. After some time, Will was allowed to leave. But as soon as he stepped outside, a man began screaming and waving a spear. Oreo explained it was likely a knight wanting to become one of Will's retainers. Luckily, guards quickly arrested him. At Eric's wedding, Will noticed his older brothers looked worried. They hadn't prepared the family's wedding gift, which would make them appear tasteless. Their eldest brother, Kurt, had sent a message saying there was no money, damaging the reputation of the duchy their family served. People might think Duke Amadeus had refused to help, as nobles were expected to support their vassals, but their father's pride prevented him from asking for assistance. Seeing their anxious faces, Will immediately declared he would pay for the wedding gift himself. Eric's wedding proceeded successfully, and Will clapped joyfully, but he realized being a noble would be more exhausting than expected. After the ceremony, Ario handed Will a jar of soybeans, the item he had been searching for in the city. Will transported himself and his friends to his new mansion, where they spent the night cooking soybeans, using magic to speed up fermentation to make delicious soup. They sat together, Will, his friends, and his family, enjoying the meal. Will quietly promised himself he would become the best noble he could be. Afterward, Will went to be baptized by Hull, thanking him for his help and offering a generous gift. At that moment, someone knocked and entered with tea. Will trembled upon seeing the girl carrying the tray. She introduced herself as Elise, Hull's granddaughter. As Will stood to introduce himself, he sensed something unusual about her. She possessed magical power. Hull confirmed it, revealing Elise had holy healing magic, a remarkable ability since Will only commanded holy purification magic. Elise helped heal the wounded at the church and had earned the title of saint. Hull wished for Elise to live a normal life and eventually marry, as she came from a noble family and had received many proposals. Will joked he would join the competition for her hand but added he was still too young. Hull agreed they could marry when they were older. Will laughed and nodded, a lonely laugh, as he found himself engaged to Elise from their first meeting. Later, Hull sat in his garden sipping tea, discussing with his servant whether the engagement was right. He had already obtained the king's approval, meaning even Duke Amadeus, Will's superior, could not object. More importantly, they recognized the advantage of tying Will to their family. The gift Will presented, a chest of gold, showed he understood the church's power. Since their family held a viscount rank, marrying Elise to a young, talented baron like Will would be a significant gain. At his brother's home, Will informed his team about the engagement. They were all happy for him except Will, who was not pleased, wishing he had gotten to know the girl first. His friends explained it was normal in their world to marry without knowing your partner. Eric hadn't met his wife until their wedding day. They asked Will to close his eyes while they applied clown makeup on him. Disguised, Will could walk around the capital unrecognized as the Dragon Slayer. Owen then told him to buy something for his future wife, making Will wonder what Elise truly thought. After shopping, he bumped into the same man who had tried to become his retainer. Owen reassured him no one would recognize him in clown clothes, but the man identified him instantly from his teeth. People gathered, and knights begged Will to hire them, while the man showed off his spear skills, spinning it wildly. Will immediately teleported away before chaos erupted. At home, Eric told him the best solution was to choose a personal retainer immediately to reject all other requests. Owen excitedly offered to become his retainer, and Will agreed instantly. Owen froze in shock. Will then took the gift he bought for Elise and left the castle, leaving Owen stunned. Using teleportation, Will entered the whole family mansion unseen, but Hull nearly caught him, forcing Will to hide. When Elise spotted him, he grabbed her hand and hid with her before her grandfather could see them. They slipped up to the rooftop, where Will pulled out the biscuits he had bought for her, though they were crushed from running. He hid them behind his back and asked if they could talk. When he asked about the engagement, Elise smiled and said she was happy her grandfather had chosen Will, and she was glad to marry the Dragon Slayer. At home, Owen told Anna and Louise he was now Will's official retainer. The two girls were annoyed, having shopped for nothing. They thought about asking Will for appointments as well, but Owen smirked, saying they would work under him as the first retainer. When Eric and his wife entered, Owen left with them. Louise then came up with a new idea to put them above Owen. They could become Will's concubines. When Will arrived, Louise tried seducing him with new clothes and strange gestures, but Will understood nothing and walked past her. At night, Louise tore up her new clothes to make them more alluring, encouraged by Anna. She admitted she hoped her family would finally acknowledge her when she married Will and opened her own dojo. Aina became equally determined. Meanwhile, Will received a dinner invitation from Elise. The next day, they sat together for the meal. After eating, Will was about to leave, but Hall's servants approached, saying he should give Elise a gift to commemorate their first outing. They headed to a nearby jewelry shop filled with rings and gemstones. To Will, they all looked cheap and unattractive. Elise gently told him he didn't need something expensive, but Will assured her he had plenty of money, especially after the dragon-slaying reward. He noticed a simple ring in the corner. The shopkeeper suggested he pick something else, claiming it was too plain for an engagement, but Will saw excitement in Elise's eyes and decided to buy it. It cost 6 times more than other rings because it was made from a magical stone. After purchasing it, they returned by carriage. On the way, Elise asked if he realized the ring was made from a magic stone, which could store large amounts of magical energy. Will clarified that wasn't why he bought it, he simply felt it suited her. He admitted his time in the capital had been stressful due to pressure as the Dragon Slayer, and he admired Elise for enduring the pressure of being a saint her entire life. He then infused magic into the ring, illuminating the carriage with a red glow and creating an illusion of starlight light surrounding them. Will was amazed by the sight, while Elise stared at him, surprised by his honesty. That night, Hall asked his servant what he thought of Will. The servant said Will was hard to read but noted one important thing: Will was the only person who treated Elise not as a saint, but as a normal girl. Erwin, Louise, and Aina enjoyed their time in the capital. Erwin asked the girls how their plan to win over Will was going, but they said they weren't in a hurry, as Will was occupied with Elise. Suddenly, Elise herself arrived, thankfully not hearing their conversation. Erwin told her Will had been summoned to the castle, but Elise had come specifically to meet them, wanting to know what kind of person Will was from his friend's perspective. At the castle, the king requested Will slay another dragon. As Will served the king, he had no choice but to accept. The Knight Commander briefed Will and Bran. The capital suffered from a food shortage, and they wanted to develop nearby land belonging to an ancient dragon named Grior. To defeat such a dragon, they needed powerful mags, so Will and Bran were summoned. Will wondered if they could truly defeat an ancient dragon, but the king assured him someone else would join them. A man named Arms, the palace mage, entered, greeted them, bowed before the king, and excitedly declared the three would set out immediately. Despite his warrior-like appearance, Arms was a very powerful magician. The three took flight together, with Arms flying far ahead at shocking speed. They headed to the army's camp to finalize strategy before battle. At Eric's house, Eric told the others more details. Will wouldn't just kill the dragon. Once it died, surrounding monsters might flood the villages, so Will had to eliminate them as well. He was authorized to form a temporary army. The group wondered why a major noble with an established army wasn't assigned instead. Eric explained it was political. If a land-owning noble handled the mission, he might later claim the land, but Will was a paper nobles without territory, so he would only receive money and a medal, while the land remained under the royal family. At that moment, noise erupted outside the gates. Many knights had gathered, all wanting to become Will's subordinates, including the spear-waving young man. These troops would form Will's temporary army. Erwin saw the crowd and felt sorry for whoever would lead them, but Eric explained Erwin himself would be commander, as Will's retainer had to take his place. Erwin tried to refuse, but the others reassured him. Over the next few days, Erwin led the temporary army, made up of younger sons of nobles or servants with no masters, all seeking glory to raise their social standing. At night, Erwin sat in his tent with the girls. Louise and Aina were finally beginning to feel afraid, as it was their first battle, though they would only face normal monsters. Will, on the other hand, had fought a skeletal dragon as his first enemy. Moments later, Elise arrived to join the campaign, as her healing magic could help. She asked about Will, and Erwin explained he had set up camp near the dragon's location, preparing to attack at dawn. When sunrise came, Will, Bran, and Arms stood above the dragon's territory, a massive pit filled with claw-like rocks. The green ancient dragon sensed them, awakened, and roared, signaling the battle's start. Arms used his magic instantly, transforming his body into shield-like armor with a giant hammer. He leapt high toward the flying dragon and smashed its head downward. Will was stunned by Arms' strength, his magic converted raw mana into physical power, and his armor was far stronger than any normal magical barrier. As Arms slammed the dragon into the ground, Bran warned Will to get ready. Arms was holding the dragon down with all his might. Will wondered if they even needed him, but Bran explained Arms's magic consumed mana rapidly. If it ran out, he would die. He had to pin the dragon down just long enough for Will to finish it. Arms gave the signal, Will cast his spell, and the dragon was defeated. Back in the army camp, Elise stood staring into the distance, thinking of Will. Owen and the others brought her breakfast to comfort her and introduced her to Will's favorite food, miso soup. Their conversation lifted her spirits until a soldier arrived with news. Will had already succeeded and slain the dragon. On the battlefield, Will stored the dragon's corpse in his magic pouch. The reward for this mission wasn't high, so they planned to sell the corpse. But Arms and Bran warned him the hardest part wasn't done yet. Will didn't understand what could be harder than killing a dragon. Bran reminded him that Alfred hadn't died from a powerful monster but from being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Hours later, Elise was in the camp healing injured soldiers. The monsters were so numerous that wounded men kept coming non-stop from the front lines. The soldiers said the mags were the only reason they were still alive. Hearing that, Elise grew more worried for Will but continued working. She healed throughout the night until she was forced to use the magic stored in the ring Will had given her. Eventually, she sat down to rest. A soldier asked if she was truly engaged to the Dragon Slayer. She confirmed and asked if Will was all right. The soldier said not only was he safe, he was the reason they were winning, adding heroes like Will were not like ordinary people. His words reminded Elise of her conversation with Will, who disliked the word hero because of its burden. She felt sad knowing the sacrifices Will made, always trying to play the part for others. She promised herself she would stay by his side and fulfill her role as a saint, healing as many as she could. When her magic ran out completely, she asked for medical tools to treat the wounded without magic. Suddenly, a soldier rushed in reporting victory but said a rescue team was needed because someone had been injured. Elise panicked and ran toward the field, terrified for Will. She passed a group of soldiers and found the injured man was one of Will's brothers, not Will himself. Then someone called her name. It was Will, unharmed and happy to see her. Upon seeing him safe, Elise relaxed, then collapsed from exhaustion. When she woke, Will was sitting beside her. He told her he had heard rumors at the front lines about how she had healed every wounded soldier who returned, and how everyone managed to fight to the end thanks to the strength of the saint. Will stood to bring her water, but she held his hand and told him she now understood why he hated being called a hero. A moment later, Arms arrived and embraced Elise. Will was shocked to learn Arms was actually Elise's uncle. A few days later, Will and his friends moved their belongings into a new house. Thanks to their recent achievements, they now lived permanently in the capital. Elise visited and brought miso soup, and Will welcomed her happily. She wanted to clarify something. Since Will lived with Louise and Aina, she thought he was engaged to them. Will quickly explained they were simply teammates who lived with him, but he used the moment to ask her opinion on concubines. Elise had no objection at all, just like everyone else he had asked. Because of that, Will could no longer refuse when Louise and Aina once again offered to become his concubines. The next day, everyone attended another wedding, this time for Herman, Will's second brother, who had married and become a knight. Everyone around Will seemed to be advancing in life, especially him, as the entire kingdom kept its eyes on him. After the ceremony, an announcement was made regarding an upcoming grand tournament. Every noble was required to participate at least once in categories like swordsmanship, spearmanship, archery, or hand-to-hand combat. Since Will was a noble, people assumed he would enter swordsmanship. Will wondered if he could enhance his body with magic like Arms, but Eric informed him magic was strictly forbidden in the tournament. Each morning, Louise, Aina, and Owen ran together. Owen always complained the girls strengthened themselves with magic and wished he had enough mana to keep up. During their run, they looked up and saw Will casually flying above them. Later, Bran told the girls Duke Amadeus had ordered them to participate as well, to prove they were noble women in both name and skill. The girls immediately stopped running and began training without magic. Owen, meanwhile, sat lazily on a couch, believing even if he lost, nothing would change. But Bran warned him if he continued like this, he would look like a burden and could be removed from the team. During dinner, Will announced that Fon, the previous tournament champion, had stepped down to give others a chance, meaning their odds of becoming famous had increased. Will then asked if Elise could join the team, and everyone agreed since her healing magic was crucial. Erwin, however, panicked about being overshadowed and shouted he would win the tournament no matter what. The next morning, Erwin ran at full speed and overtook the girls, while Will nearly collapsed running behind them. During weapon practice, Will struggled to control his sword. Later, while others trained, Will fell asleep in bed from exhaustion. Erwin trained so hard his hands bled but refused to stop. The girls began to think he might truly win. But then bad news arrived. The king had ordered Ferren to participate as a barrier for younger nobles. Erwin was devastated and locked himself in his room. The girls tried to comfort him, insisting losing was fine, but he snapped, saying they couldn't understand his frustration because they had magic while he didn't. Hurt, the girls left him alone. In the morning, Erwin asked Will if he would be kicked from the team if he lost, but Will was still asleep. When he woke, he admitted he was actually worried about Elise, who had never trained physically and was scared to join the team. Hearing this made Erwin realize each of them had their own fears. He apologized to the girls and reconciled. On tournament day, everyone headed to the arena. Elise arrived carrying a lunchbox for after the matches. Will's first match was a shock. He was paired with Fane, the previous champion. Will drew his sword, the bell rang, and Ferren instantly rushed forward, struck Will in the stomach with his sword's pommel, and knocked him out in 1 second. After regaining consciousness, Will quietly returned to his seat and drank tea with his friends while watching the remaining matches. Erwin advanced steadily in swordsmanship. Aina progressed in spears. Louise advanced in hand-to-hand combat but was stopped in the semi-finals. Bran praised her for reaching such a high rank despite her magic fist style being useless in a no-magic tournament. Aina reached the spear finals, where her opponent was the young man who had tried to become Will's retainer. As soon as he saw her, he grew excited, imagining Will might be watching. He launched forward quickly, thrusting repeatedly. Aina tried to counter, but he parried her strikes, then performed his signature move, spinning his spear until hers flew from her hands. She returned to the group and admitted she lost, saying her opponent, Rude, was incredibly strong. He came from a merchant family and was skilled in accounting and law. But Will wasn't listening. He was asleep from exhaustion because he had cooked all the food Elise brought. Meanwhile, Erwin won his semi-final match but suffered a deep shoulder injury. His next opponent would be Ferren. The girls bandaged him while officials urged him to forfeit, but Erwin had made up his mind to continue. The girls told him they knew Bran had pressured him with harsh words. Erwin admitted it was true and that he feared becoming a burden, but the girls showed him the lunchbox Will had prepared, proof Will would never throw anyone away. Erwin took a bite, stood up, and declared that as a member of Will's team, retreat was not an option. A few days later, Erwin and Aina began training under Ferren. Louise, on the other hand, asked Will to train with her and her instructor, who turned out to be Arms himself. Will agreed, beginning the next phase of his journey. 3 years later in the countryside, Will's family struggled to repair their farmland. Kurt reviewed tax documents when his wife informed him visitors from the capital had arrived. He found it strange but grew irritated when he learned it involved Will. At the mansion, the visitor delivered a letter from the royal auditor. Kurt handed it to his wife dismissively, assuming it was another request to join Will's household, saying he didn't care how famous Will had become. But suddenly, his wife screamed after reading the message. Will had died while exploring ancient ruins. A few days earlier, Will had finally become an officially registered adventurer, happy to be freed from noble duties. His first mission was a request from the king to investigate ancient ruins. Will's team entered with Bran as their guide. Bran explained many adventurers had been sent in but none returned, even elite adventurers sent to find them disappeared. The guild suspected a dragon dwelling within, and no one was better suited than the dragon slayers led by Will. As they advanced, Will scolded the team for hiding behind him. Owen insisted Will was the only one who had fought a dragon, and a dragon's breath would kill them instantly. Before opening the door, Bran used detection magic. Inside, they found nothing, no traces of vanished adventurers. Suddenly, Bran sensed danger and yelled for them to run, but it was too late, the doors shut. A magic circle appeared beneath them, freezing their legs. Bran warned them to brace for anything, it was a trap set by an ancient magical civilization. One by one, each began to vanish. Elise tried to grab Will, but he disappeared the moment she reached for him, and seconds later, she vanished too. When they awoke, they were in a completely different room with a symbol on the wall labeled reverse suspension. Bran realized the teleportation had taken them to the deepest level, leaving only one option: climb up to escape. Louise wasn't afraid, assuming Will could teleport them out, but Will explained his teleportation required precise knowledge of both location and destination, impossible now. Their only choice was to climb. They reached the next level. Elise held tightly onto Will, who smiled and reassured her. Entering another chamber, the door slammed shut and Golem Guardians activated. Will prepared to cast a spell, but the others stopped him, saying they had to conserve his mana for the unknown floors ahead. The three fought the golems while Bran and Will supported with limited spells. After the fight, Elise healed their wounds. Aina noticed skeletons against the walls, and Bran assumed they belonged to the previous adventurers. The next staircase was also filled with golems. The team fought floor after floor. Outside, 5 days had passed. The king and arms grew worried, and nobles whispered Will was likely dead. Many were pleased at the idea. When a priest passed by, they expressed concern for his granddaughter, but he told them Will and Elise were still alive. Nearby, a noble named Bruckner listened. Some wondered who had spread the rumor of Will's death. The truth was it came from a noble seeking promotion to commissioner who had even sent a message to Kurt announcing Will's death, hoping Will's title would pass to his children. Meanwhile, inside the ruins, the team was exhausted after 5 days of non-stop fighting. Still, Will tried to stay cheerful as he shared a meal with Elise. They only slept 2 hours at a time, alternating between combat and rest. Their fatigue grew and injuries worsened. The next chamber was larger, filled with even more golems. Elise healed Erwin, who worried they would die there. She encouraged him, and Erwin vowed he couldn't die yet, not before defeating Fan someday. His words strengthened her resolve. Before entering the next floor, Elise told Will they should escape and that she would regret not marrying him sooner if they died. Her words encouraged him, and they continued. To their surprise, the next room was a massive empty space with no golems, but Bran stayed alert. In the distance, he spotted a huge statue that slowly awakened, spreading its wings. It was a golem dragon. Bran cast a barrier instantly, and within moments, the dragon attacked. Will reinforced the shield with magic, but golems burst from side doors and attacked Aina. More poured in, surrounding them. Will and Bran held off the dragon while Owen and Louise fought the approaching golems. Elise desperately healed Aina, burning through the last of her mana, even the mana stored in her magic ring. If the fight continued, Will and Bran would run out of mana, and the dragon would kill them all. So Will decided to defeat the dragon himself. Bran doubted they could pierce the dragon's mithril-like body but chose to trust Will, transferring his last mana to him. Will countered the dragon's breath with a powerful spell. Bran collapsed, happy to see Will, who reminded him of Alfred. Will faced the dragon alone, feeling overwhelmed and himself fading. He apologized to his friends. But suddenly, Elise shouted she would use the miracle light spell. In one swift motion, she kissed Will and collapsed. Will held her and felt his magic surge. His power exploded. He launched his attack with everything he had, and the dragon fell. With the dragon's death, the remaining golems shut down, allowing the others to rescue Will and Elise, who had both fainted. Hours later, Will regained consciousness and found Louise and Aina discussing the fight. The miracle light spell replenished physical strength and rarely restored mana, but it did not require a kiss, meaning Elise had used the excuse deliberately because she couldn't bear dying without kissing the man she loved. When Will and Elise woke, they joined Bran, who was inspecting their surroundings. He realized the creator was a famous ancient mage known for crafting magical devices. The entire ruin was likely built as a test for his inheritance. Owen called them over excitedly. They had found something incredible, a massive shipyard with ancient airships identical to the prototypes their kingdom used for modern designs. Owen pressed a button, a wall shifted open, and at long last, they had found their escape. Because of their discovery of 7 ancient airships, the magic stones that powered them, the golem beasts, and the research left behind, every member of Will's party was rewarded with 2 million gold coins, enough to never worry about money again. Afterward, Will informed Arms they would be leaving the capital and focusing adventures around the duchy. Arms promised to track down whoever had spread the rumor of Will's death, which surprised Will, as he had no idea what happened while he was gone. It became clear many nobles were jealous of Will's success and had spread malicious rumors. Aina pointed out nobles were also irritated by how close the party was to Will. Now that they each possessed 2 million gold coins, they would attract even more unwanted attention. To avoid this, they decided to use the guild system to reassign the reward money. Instead of each keeping their share, they gave the entire amount to Will. Since Elise was Will's fiancée, she also offered all her assets. In short, Will suddenly became richer by 10 million gold coins. Meanwhile, Rock, the noble who wished for Will's death, held a secret meeting with others plotting against him. They agreed to combine their influence to eliminate Will. Outside Will's mansion, a hooded girl watched quietly as Will and his group ate biscuits inside. Will sensed movement near the window, but when he looked, no one was there. Still, he decided they needed a guard for the mansion once they left. With so many people resentful toward him, they needed someone strong and loyal. The group immediately suggested finally hiring Rude, the spear wielder, who had wanted to become Will's servant for 3 years. When Will finally accepted, Rude burst into tears of joy. Will sensed movement again outside, but the girl disappeared before he could see her. Later that day, the girl attempted to spy again and saw them eating lunch, but this time, the others felt her presence. Louise ran to the window, and Owen positioned himself between the window and Will. When they looked out, the spy had vanished. Rude vowed to catch her and advised Will to leave the capital as soon as possible, but Will said he still had something to do first. At that moment, the spy ran toward the city. In the afternoon, Will and his friends visited the Magic Guild, the organization studying the teleportation spell Will had discovered in the ruins. The guild master, Lucas, welcomed them and showed a new magic circle capable of summoning anything the caster imagined. Owen joked thieves would love such a device. Will tried it himself. He closed his eyes, focused, and an object appeared, a witch's outfit. The summoned witch smacked Will, who insisted he had been distracted by the conversation about thieves and did not intend to summon that. He tried again and succeeded. The burst of light was huge, suggesting he had summoned something very large. Later, the spy saw Will and his friends exiting the guild carrying a massive cart. She tried to follow, but Will used teleportation and returned home instantly. Meanwhile, outside Rock's estate, Rude spotted nobles boarding a carriage to continue their plot against Will and noticed Rock laughing from an upstairs window. The spy returned to Will's mansion. Looking through the window again, she saw Will hosting a large farewell party, thanking those who had supported him, Duke Amadeus, Arms, Bran, and Priest Hol. Then Will brought out a huge platter filled with tuna sushi, the very object he had summoned from the guild's teleportation circle. The nobles were curious how to eat the strange dish, so Will demonstrated dipping it into soy sauce, something he had perfected over 3 years. Guests loved the taste, while the spy continued to watch. At the same time, Rude informed Will that Rock was the one who spread rumors of his death. Will was confused, as he had never spoken to Rock. Rude explained Rock did it to damage Ruckner, Rock's own brother, who had a close connection with Will. Rock had also sent a messenger to Will's family, hoping Kurt would feel indebted and that once Kurt's children inherited Will's title, Rock would gain influence. Fortunately, Rude revealed he had a plan to keep the royal auditor busy for days. At Rock's estate, he soon learned rumors blaming him for spreading news of Will's death had circulated through the entire capital and even reached the royal palace. He was summoned. This was part of Rude's counterattack, fighting lies with more lies. Rude also revealed a hidden truth: he was actually Rock's illegitimate son. Later, Elise arrived with more tuna for the group, but the spy outside could no longer contain herself. She burst into the mansion and walked toward Will with an unnerving aura. Owen tried to stop her, but she threw him aside easily. She approached Will, then stopped at the table and ate a piece of sushi. Lord Edgar, the kingdom's general, stepped inside and introduced the girl as his daughter, Wilma. Wilma explained she had been observing Will all day to determine whether he could feed her. She had watched all the tea, snacks, and sushi he had enjoyed and cheerfully told Will he passed her test. She then left with Elise to look for more food. Lord Edgar apologized for his daughter's behavior. Bran commented Wilma seemed to have hero syndrome, meaning her body continuously generated magic, making her extremely strong and giving her an enormous appetite. Aina and Elise immediately adored her and both wanted to feed her more fatty tuna. Lord Edgar asked Will to hire Wilma as his personal guard and even offered her as a potential bride. Will refused, explaining he only wanted to continue adventuring and hunting monsters in the duchy. That answer made Lord Edgar notice something. He turned to Duke Amadeus and asked whether he really planned to allow Will to hunt monsters freely. Duke Amadeus looked at Will and told him he had a special mission prepared. A few days later, Kurt was still staring at the letter reporting Will's death, which also explained how his son could inherit Will's title. Kurt laughed at his unexpected fortune until his wife suddenly screamed after seeing something outside. When Kurt looked, he found Will and his companion standing before him. Will, his team, and Bran sat with Kurt for a meeting. They explained the former Duke had led an expedition into their forest 15 years earlier to search for medicinal herbs, which ended in disaster with 2,000 soldiers dying and becoming zombies. The current Duke had assigned Will the mission of purifying them. They then discussed monster management. Since the enchanted forest was under Kurt's rule, he would receive a percentage of resources collected there. The accountant, Claw, explained the standard share was 30%, but Kurt demanded 50%. It was unreasonable, especially after Bran said they were willing to return any personal belongings of the fallen soldiers to his people. Herman, the second brother, tried to calm Kurt, but he refused to back down, claiming the soldiers owned very little and their funerals had already been done. Elise intervened, explaining funerals meant nothing unless bodies were properly purified, so she was prepared to hold ceremonies again after the mission. Kurt mocked her, accusing her of wanting church donations. His attitude angered Erwin, who nearly struck him. Will quickly stepped in to stop the fight. The others reminded Kurt they were there to negotiate with the Lord, not the heir. Kurt almost started another outburst, but tension ended thanks to Wilma's loudly rumbling stomach. That night, Kurt held a private meeting with the men of his region. They were pleased their sons and brothers would finally be purified and find peace, but Kurt insisted Will had come only for business, not to visit family. Meanwhile, the rest of the group ate dinner at the house. Herman explained to Will their older brother had become increasingly anxious since Will left home. Kurt had always feared Will would return and take his place. Herman's wife, Marlene, arrived with food and scolded him for not offering drinks to Bran, who declined. Marlene encouraged Will in his mission, revealing her grandfather had been one of the men who died during the expedition 15 years ago. Will promised to return any belongings of her grandfather. She thanked him and said she hoped he would one day become the heir. The group began to worry they might be getting entangled in inheritance politics. The next day, Will's team entered the enchanted forest to begin the mission. They mocked the dead soldiers out loud. Although the zombies had limited intelligence, they understood the insult and began appearing. Elise cast a magic circle, and she and Will raised a purification barrier. When zombies crossed it, they vanished instantly. Erwin felt useless because the barrier did all the work, but Bran told them collecting the belongings of the dead was also part of the job. They continued until most undead were gone. Even the former Duke appeared and was purified upon touching the barrier. Only Marlene's grandfather remained. Just as they waited, a wyvern suddenly attacked. Wilma cut it down in a single blow, and purification magic activated. Soon after, countless dead animals appeared and began attacking. The team moved together and destroyed everything that emerged. Hours passed, exhaustion set in, and their purification magic faded. Marlene's grandfather finally appeared, but to their shock, he had evolved into a lick. He asked about his granddaughter, and Will explained she was safe, married, and still controlling her husband. Satisfied, the lick dropped his sword and allowed Elise to purify him. After completing the mission, they returned all belongings of the dead to their families. The villagers thanked Will, but Kurt suddenly arrived to make an announcement. He ordered the villagers to hand over all armor and weapons collected. The villagers protested, wanting to bury the armor since they hadn't been able to bury their loved ones. Kurt insisted he needed the metal for farming tools. To satisfy both sides, Will summoned a massive block of iron and gave it to Kurt. Kurt was annoyed, but since Will would soon be gone, he left without arguing. Duke Amadeus promised Will they would investigate and return any belongings still unclaimed. Relieved, Will thought the mission was finally over, hoping to escape family trouble, but the Duke warned him to stay prepared. As Will and his group left, Duke Amadeus and Ruckner watched from afar, stating their plan was still ongoing. When the team returned, the accountant asked if they wanted to attend the funeral. The next day, Elise led the ceremony. The villagers grew angrier at Kurt, who didn't even attend. That evening, a large feast was held to honor the dead. Villagers offered Will wine, but he refused and insisted it be given to Bran, who also refused, surprising Will. Later, Kurt's wife, Emily, arrived with her children to pay respects. The children admired Will and asked for stories. Aina and Louise performed a presentation of Will's past achievements, after which Will gave the children sweets he made. When the feast ended, Will met the accountant again. The accountant asked Will to become the region's new heir. Will was stunned, but the accountant insisted it was what the people wanted. They had no future under Kurt's leadership. Will said he only wanted to be an adventurer, but the village chief told him he could appoint someone like Rude to manage daily affairs. Will could still adventure while being their lord. Suddenly, Bran appeared and told Will this was also the royal family's wish. Later that night, Bran revealed the truth of the king's plan. The king had wanted to develop the southern lands for years, but the region's rulers were weak, and Kurt was incompetent and short-sighted. The king couldn't force their father to retire without angering other nobles, so he planned something cleaner: send Will back home, provoke Kurt into committing a crime, and then force the father into early retirement to take responsibility. The moment the father retired, Will, now a celebrated hero loved by villagers, would become the natural successor. Bran hadn't drunk alcohol all night to stay sharp. He knew Kurt was unpredictable. Even the massive sums Will earned were no coincidence. They were preparations for funding future development. The next morning, Will shared everything with his team. They were confused. Will never questioned a royal order, but it made sense when they saw him playing with his nephews. Becoming ruler would mean taking away those children's future as nobles. Unfortunately, the accountant overheard everything. That night, a crowd of villagers interrupted Will's dinner, demanding to meet him and begging him to accept the position of heir before he left. The next day, Will was shocked. He hadn't planned on leaving at all. Bran noticed the accountant spying from the bushes, confronted him, and warned him the king hated when commoners interfered in royal strategies. The mere rumor of Will leaving was dangerous enough. The accountant left, but not before warning Bran about Emily, Kurt's wife, a warning that was accurate. That same night, Ally overheard Kurt ordering loyal villagers to punish anyone who tried to support Will. By morning, Will still didn't know what to decide. Bran then confessed the final truth: if Will accepted the position, Kurt wouldn't just be dismissed, he'd be eliminated to prevent future conflicts. During their next meeting, Will tried once more to negotiate peacefully. He asked Kurt for a few undeveloped lands to manage, promising to help promote him and support him financially so both brothers could rise and the region would thrive. But Kurt recoiled in disgust, believing Will was trying to trick him and slowly steal his authority piece by piece. He ordered Will to leave immediately. Outside the estate, Will met Emily. He admitted that no matter what compromise he offered, no one would ever be satisfied. He only wanted a way forward that didn't harm anyone, but now felt completely lost. Emily saw the truth in his eyes. She confessed she cared about nothing except her children's safety and had tried for years to get Will closer to them, hoping he would feel sympathy for them when the time came. Will thanked her quietly and left. Later that night, back at home, Will finally made his decision. he would accept the position but swore he wouldn't allow a single death, not even Kurt's. His team agreed without hesitation. The next morning, they opened shops in the town, Will with spices, Louise with clothes, Aina with artisan crafts, and Erwin with weapons. The townspeople flooded the stores immediately. Kurt's followers panicked. Will's new businesses were stealing all their customers. They complained to Kurt, even asking if they could kill Will. Kurt refused, knowing Will was a mage and any attempt would end in instant annihilation. When Kurt's followers returned to the village, they found themselves surrounded by Will's group. No one was hurt, on the contrary, Will offered them money and training materials to improve their shops. The gesture was enough to turn all of Kurt's men against him. Meanwhile, Will and Rude searched for safe houses for Emily and her children, places where they would live once Kurt's downfall became public. As for Kurt, the plan was to send him to the church where his removal would look merciful rather than lethal. All Will needed now was to convince the priest. At the same time, nobles from across the region requested meetings with Will, because Duke Amadeus and Ruckner were close to him. Lesser nobles wanted to secure favor before it was too late. But another scheme was unfolding. Rock, the noble who previously plotted against Will, handed his servant a mysterious artifact, an ancient magical item, and ordered him to deliver it to Kurt. A few days later, Kurt was furious when only one villager showed up for his meeting. Everyone else now supported Will. Even the last man admitted Will had offered him training in the capital, then quickly left, leaving Kurt completely alone. Cornered, powerless, and paranoid, Kurt finally snapped. He grabbed a knife to kill Will himself, but Rock's servant stopped him, explaining a knife was useless, then revealed the artifact, a magical relic known as the Dragon Flute. Days later, Bran sensed Kurt heading alone into the forest where Will's team had intentionally spread rumors to lure him in. When they met, Kurt ordered Will's servants to leave. He accused Will of stealing his success and rightful position, then revealed the Dragon Flute. Bran recognized the danger immediately. The flute was supposed to summon every dragon in nearby mountains, and Will's magic alone would not be enough. Elise tried to appeal to Kurt's heart, but he no longer cared for the villagers. He claimed they had betrayed him and that he could build a new family after becoming a hero and taking Will's estate. Bran attempted to break the flute, but it did not crack. Kurt blew into it. To his shock, no dragons appeared. Instead, dark spirits gathered around him. Bran realized the truth. This was not the legendary dragon flute but the flute of evil. It absorbed malice and granted its user enough strength to defeat his enemy at the cost of turning him into an undead monster. Kurt's body twisted into a massive spirit-bound creature, and darkness swallowed his thoughts as he fixed glowing eyes on Will. Bran urged Will to use holy magic immediately, insisting Kurt was already dead. The monster attacked, and Elise blocked the first strike with a barrier, ready to sacrifice herself. Realizing there was no saving his brother, Will asked her to widen the holy field. After one last look at what remained of Kurt, Will unleashed his sacred magic. The light purified the monster, and the flute of evil dropped. At that moment, Kurt's twisted spirit flew across the kingdom, smashing through the window of Rock's manor where Rock had been speaking of using his son, Rude, against Will, and the spirit took his life. The next day, night sealed Rock's estate. Will and Rude learned Rock and his conspirators had all died from the spirit's attack, and priests purified the remains. The spirit was part of the monster Will destroyed, but Kurt's hatred had guided it toward Rock. Rumors spread claiming Kurt himself had murdered Rock, complicating Amelie's situation further. Amelie and her children eventually moved in with Herman. Will felt deep bitterness. He hated being called a hero when he failed to save his own brother, hated that every noble had hidden schemes, and hated even more that he had become one of them. Bran reminded him he was a noble now and nobles always had plans. Will spent the day silent, struggling with the hypocrisy of this world and his own role. That night, Elise confessed she sometimes felt him drifting away. She held his hand. Will smiled faintly and promised her he would try to be a better noble from now on. When the king summoned him, he granted Will all the undeveloped lands and asked what reward he wanted next. Will requested the personal right to bestow noble titles out of the 12 that had become vacant after Rock's death. The king erupted in anger, followed by Edgar and the high priest. Duke Amadeus defended Will, while others accused him of trying to increase his land's political power. Arms stepped in, urging Will to withdraw his request, then immediately asked for a portion of the lands himself. The king stopped the argument, denied Arms's request, and insisted Will alone would develop those lands. At the same time, Arms secretly signaled to Will that the plan had succeeded, proving his cleverness and strength. The king granted Will the right to grant 2 noble titles and elevated his rank to count. He praised everyone's acting except Arms, who was far too obvious. Arms laughed, knowing he had been caught. Back in the countryside, Will told Amelie he intended to give the 2 noble titles to her sons when they grew older. She thanked him, knowing her children would one day understand their father's fate was the result of his own choices. Will began developing his new lands, expanding territories, building facilities for the church, and planning districts overseen by Ruckner, Edgar, and Amadeus, all in return for their support in securing noble titles. He even designed a factory for producing soy sauce. Day after day, his companions arrived with new requests, and Will found himself truly enjoying his new life as a noble. And at night, he sat with his friends around the dinner table, content at last. This is where the video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.